Hi, I'm gonna bushwhack my Phyrexian Obliterator into your 7/7. Kira!
Hi, I'm a 9-mana board wipe with an emblem attached. Maya. And today we're doing our first double episode. How exciting.
Part 1.
Today we are talking about, this double episode is talking about the core fundamental archetypes in Magic: The Gathering. And today we're specifically talking about the assertive strategies, the strategies with a proactive game plan that are looking to, they're looking to pose their opponent question. And there are sort of three core archetypes that fit into this sort of proactive category. The first one is aggro, the second one is combo, and the third one is tempo. Kira, how much do you know about these archetypes?
I am most familiar, and I think most of our listeners as well will be most familiar with the concept of aggro as an archetype. If there's anything that Magic players tend to be familiar with, it's the idea of an aggressive strategy. The idea of turning your creatures sideways and beating face down. Aside from aggro, combo. And you and I are both combo enjoyers. I love seeing combo in Standard. I even don't mind seeing combo in Modern, to be honest with you. But aggro, I think, is the most quintessential archetype of Magic. This is the red deck wins. This is mono-red aggro. This is where that archetype is king of the hill, so to speak.
So, define it for me then. What is an aggro deck?
Aggro decks are clearly defined by their intent to reduce their opponent's life total to 0 as quickly as possible by any means necessary. And that can be haste enablers, that can be creatures with haste, that can be pump spells that buff your creature's power and or toughness. The idea with aggro is no holds barred. Every turn, you swing, swing, swing.
The way I like to think about aggro as delineated from something like tempo, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is that aggressive strategies are relatively self-evident. Typically, it is clear that the cards in the deck are trying to get you to 0 as quickly as possible, whether that is because the creatures are cheap and have high power, or because the spells give creatures power, or because the spells are dealing damage to your face. When you look at an aggro deck, it is easy to tell what it is, and that is how you delineate it between something like an aggro deck and a tempo deck.
Aggro as well, it tends to be low to the ground. And by that, we mean a low mana curve, creatures and spells with a low mana cost. It runs a very low number of lands because it can support a higher number of spells, because an aggro curve typically does not reach past 3 as your highest mana spell costing 3 mana. Some exceptions do apply here, Leyline of Resonance being one of them as a 4 mana spell, Sunspine Links being a 4 mana spell, but again, Sunspine Links exist pretty much in the sideboard of mono-red aggressive strategies in Standard right now. And Leyline of Resonance is in some ways relying on it being in your opening hand, so you get to put it onto the battlefield as a pre-game action.
Your goal as a aggressive deck is never to be casting a 4-mana do-nothing enchantment.
In general, that is the goal is Mountains enter tapped, here's my creature with haste, and I am attacking you immediately.
From a practical perspective, no spells in your deck will actually cost 4 mana. Aside from cards in the sideboard. So even cards like Stoke the Flames, which is a 4-mana deal 4, has the ability to make it cheaper by tapping creatures. So in reality, it's usually a 1 or 2 mana spell. There are lots of different kinds of aggressive decks, whether it be decks that turn creatures sideways, or decks that are a little bit harder to interact with and are just looking to throw 7 copies of Lightning Bolt at your face. But the quintessential core game plan is the same. Get your opponent's life from 20 to 0 as quickly as possible.
And it does bear mentioning that right now in our current Standard meta, turn 2. With the right setup, that is turn 2.
Yes.
And that is devastatingly fast.
That is faster than most Eternal formats.
It is a quick, dirty, mountain tap, mouse. It is incredibly fast. Most other decks currently turns 4, 5, and beyond. Aggro is moving quicker than that, and the answers have to be just as fast.
It's worth noting as well that the archetypes we talk about today and in the next episode combine with other archetypes. And we're going to be using a little bit of a word trick to clarify what we mean. So we're going to talk about decks like aggro combo decks and combo aggro decks. So it's worth noting that the emphasis, the core game plan of the deck will be the one that we say first. So the important thing to take away from this is that aggro combo decks and combo aggro decks are not the same thing. An aggro combo deck is an aggro deck with a combo game plan as well, whereas a combo aggro deck is a combo deck that also has an aggressive game plan. We're going to give you an idea as well about decks that are well known or decks in the current standard metagame that represent these archetypes well. So the quintessential aggro deck in standard right now, of course, would be mono red mice.
Mono red mice, you may also have seen this represented as mono red prowess, mono red aggro, but typically right now to delineate just mono red aggro with letting you know what's in the deck, mono red mice or mono red prowess, and prowess again leaning on Monastery Swiftspear, Emberheart Challenger, and Slingshot Show Off.
Aggro combines with most archetypes, and it is worth noting that some archetypes are more prone to being mushed together, essentially, with other archetypes, and aggro is often mixed together with many archetypes. One archetype it is almost never mixed with, though, is control. The reason for this being that the game plans are fundamentally opposite. Aggro wants to go fast and be proactive. Control wants to be slow and reactive. There isn't really a cohesive mix of aggro and control that has been well represented in a standard metagame, at least for a very long time.
It's also worth pointing out in that way that these are typically color pairs that are not overlapping. Your typical aggro decks are red-green, mono-red, sometimes red-black as well. Control tends to lean more in blue-white or blue-white-black. And for that reason, you can see there's pretty much no color overlap, with the core identity being red for aggro and blue for control. And there's very little overlap in that way.
We will see where those colors overlap and where they don't, but even looking at those color overlaps, you'll notice that almost none of the cards are the same. The only cards that tend to be shared between aggressive and controlling decks are the cheap removal spells, and even then that's not always true. In terms of an aggro combo deck currently in standard, this one is maybe the easiest. It's Leyline aggro. It is an aggro deck that has this secondary combo game plan of using Leyline of Resonance to kill your opponent on turn 2 or 3. It's that little bit quicker, it's that little bit more explosive. It has a better matchup against the controlling decks because you can get under them much quicker. On the other end of that spectrum, we have an aggro mid-range deck, and this is where I would put green-red mice, at least in its current iteration, especially the Pro Tour versions of the deck were looking more mid-rangey and are able to have a more consistently grindy game plan, even if their primary strategy is to beat base and turn things sideways. Talking about aggro tempo decks, this is a little more nuanced, and we'll talk about it in the tempo section. So we're just going to put a quick pin in this, because in order to understand this sort of mix, we need to have a better understanding of what tempo is.
Aggro is typically good for newer players. Games are shorter, there are fewer consequential decisions, and it's easy to play at a reasonable level. This is where we've mentioned before, low skill floor, high skill ceiling. It is a deck that is very easy to pick up because it has a very straightforward, very understandable game plan. When you look at for example, mono red aggro deck, you have a pretty good idea of what you're supposed to be doing turn in, turn out, and that is turning your creatures sideways and beating face. Anyone can pick up and play an aggro deck, and the people, because of that high skill ceiling, the people who are able to play aggro the best are often miles and miles better than the rest.
Watching a pro player play an aggro deck and watching somebody who is relatively new play an aggro deck is worlds apart. And while this is true for every deck, of course, it is particularly pronounced in aggressive strategies. Moving right along.
Let's talk about your favorite archetype.
My favorite archetype. This is combo, or combination decks. These are the decks that leverage powerful synergies of otherwise low-impact cards to win the game. These can take a variety of forms. These can be A plus B combos, like Vraska and Innkeeper's Talent, or they can be critical mass combo decks, like Orzhov Raise the Past combo. And critical mass decks, just for a little bit of a quick explanation, are decks that require a certain number of particular pieces in order to be good. Oftentimes there is more redundancy in these pieces, but there is a higher level that is required to get to. A really good example of this is, despite being an aggressive deck, is Burn. Burn is kind of a type of combo deck where you have a critical mass of spells that all do the same thing, and none of your spells do anything until it's the 7th one. You can cast 6 copies of Lava Spike and your opponent is happy, but once you cast the 7th one, they die.
This is also, again, where we make that slight delineation between combo aggro and aggro combo.
Certainly. Burn is fundamentally an aggro combo deck.
Combo decks especially as well are worth noting here. Typically 2 cards. It is usually A plus B that leads to the win. As mentioned with that Vraska Innkeeper's Talent, you also have Unstoppable Slasher, Bloodletter of Akhlazotz. These puzzle pieces that fit together that spell victory.
It is certainly the most common type of combo deck, A, by virtue of the combos being easier to find, but also because these tend to be a little bit more difficult to disrupt, and because it is easier to build a game plan around them. Some amount of the time, you can just play a black-green mid-range deck, and Vraska and Innkeeper's Talents are 8 Pokemon cards.
And that's where you would find that mid-range combo.
Certainly.
You have a combo hidden in the deck, but the deck's overall plan is to execute a mid-range game, to survive long enough, to keep beating your opponent down, to mitigate damage, push your strategy, and also maybe I give you 18 poison counters in one go. Oopsie.
And it gives you outs against certain kinds of decks that you might otherwise be vulnerable to. Combo decks vary in construction quite a bit, and it depends largely on their secondary game plan. So, in terms of a pure combo deck, the one that springs to mind in the context of Standard today is the Abuela's Awakening combo deck. Its construction is entirely focused around finding and executing the combo as soon as possible. So a good example of this would be a combo aggro deck. This is Aristocrats. Well, one of the versions of this is Aristocrats, rather. It will build a deck around otherwise aggressive creatures, but it will use high synergy interactions as reach, so cards like Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat. You're more likely to be familiar with these types of decks from Eternal formats, particularly in Commander, but we do have that black-red sacrifice deck in Standard at the moment, which is doing a relatively similar thing.
There is also an Orzhov version that's running around right now that benefits off of Elisil Core and Raise the Past, and then also Amalia, Benevides Agir, which will then wipe the board and trigger Elisil Core a bunch more times.
The quintessential, aggressively slanted, critical mass combo deck. And that is the thing about aggressive combo decks, so combo aggro decks, is that they will often be critical mass decks because in order to be able to execute an aggressive strategy, you need a number of redundant aggressive pieces. This is compared to something like a combo mid-range deck, like Temur Otters.
Blah.
We haven't seen much of it recently.
Thank goodness.
It is a resilient combo deck with good pieces that is otherwise built into a mid-range game plan. It allows the combo to be a dangerous threat of activation tool when the combo itself is vulnerable in the matchup, and then can just execute a normal mid-range game plan quite effectively.
I've played against Temur Otters a couple of times, and believe me, the threat of the Otter combo is looming at times during the game, and you are doing everything in your power to push the combo back, because the combo for Otters is a one-turn. It's a one-turn kill. But the problem, of course, with Otters then having that mid-range backup is that they still just end up killing you with a bunch of Otters.
Yeah, they just have 3 Otters in play, they cast a Torch the Tower, blow up your blocker, and hit you for 6.
Yeah.
Combo tempo decks are a little bit rarer because they require a very intricate balancing of the game plan. The one that jumps to mind for me, and this is a little bit of a callback, is Blue-Red Splinter Twin combo in Modern.
Splinter Twin unbanned again.
Yay! Unbanned and bad. It is built around, this particular deck is built around a combination of threats, permission, and a combo in order to keep the opponent off balance. Often these decks are much more about maneuvering your opponent into choosing between a game-ending threat and the threat of a combo to win, and there making the wrong choice allows you to win the game.
In general, it feels a bit like a psych-out kind of game, where you're saying, do you fear the combo or do you fear the game-ending threat? And you want them to pick the one you don't actually have. You want them to be like, I'm afraid of the combo, and you're like, good, I don't have the combo, it's the game-ending threat. Or, I'm going to pick the game-ending threat. Oh, cool, I don't have that, I have combo.
It's very much, there are play patterns in Twin that are like, cast a Pestamite on your end step, target your untapped land. Are you going to Lightning Bolt my Pestamite now, or are you going to leave it a turn because you think I don't have the combo and I'm going to hit you down? It's quite the balancing act. It is very tricky, and that is why these game plans have historically been so popular when they've been prevalent. The issue is that they don't often exist because the balance is so fine. Now, a combination from a combo deck that often exists is Combo Control, a fan favorite for sure. And we're going to shift into an Eternal format again here. We're going to be talking about Pioneer. The go-to deck in my mind for this is Blue-Red Creativity. Combo Control decks are typically a combo deck that leverages a combo either as a game ender or a way to generate enough resources in order to win. And we see this in Pioneer Creativity because some versions are playing Xenaghost Worldspine Worm, which will kill you on the spot, and other versions are just playing Atraxa. So when you cast your Creativity, it is a 4-mana, draw 6-card spell. The deck often looks more like a control deck than a combo deck, and occasionally uses otherwise controlling cards as combo pieces. So for instance, Narset Parter of Veils is a relatively common combo piece that you will see in both combo control and control combo decks. It is worth noting that for combo control, the delineation between combo control and control combo is relatively slim and is a point for extended argument. I believe that Creativity in Pioneer is fundamentally a combo deck with control pieces, but there is definitely arguments that can be made, especially for the Atraxa version, that it is the other way around.
Tempo! This actually, I'll start off this discussion with saying tempo, I think, is something I'm the least familiar with overall. I am sure that if I look back through my 5 years of playing, I'll realize I've actually been playing a ton of tempo. But it is something where when someone says tempo, do you play a tempo deck? I go, I don't know, maybe.
It's funny because tempo has been one of the most prolific archetypes in Standard for the last 12, 18 months. So you definitely have played with and or against tempo, but the understanding of what a tempo deck actually is a little bit obscure. Let's start with the definition of the word tempo. Tempo means time or pace, depending on the context in which it's used. And it's fundamentally about making sure you are being assertive in the matchup. Your job is to keep your opponent on the back foot, keep them off balance, and make sure that you don't fall behind. Tempo decks are most often aggressively slanted because of the innate need of tempo decks to be proactive to stay ahead. It will typically consist of 2 main features. These are threats, so things that are going to kill your opponent over time, and permission. So these are cheap pieces of interaction, cheap pieces of removal. And I would say that tempo is the quintessential questions deck. It will ask your opponent to answer a series of questions. The question is almost always, can you deal with this threat? And if you can deal with their threat over and over again through their permission, you win the game. What has been your experience with the tempo decks that you've played? Have you felt like... Because I love playing tempo decks because they feel really good to play.
I'm going to say your two favorite words right now. Orzhov Pixie.
Not a tempo deck.
Which is interesting you say that because I have found it has tempo tendencies. This idea of pushing your opponent on their back foot through pieces like Momentum Breaker. And that's kind of it in Orzhov Pixie. But I have found that when that deck is on pace, it feels unstoppable. You have attacked their hand so thoroughly that they are just miserably top-decking several turns in a row. You are momentum breaking, you're plussing your Liliana, you're threatening ultimate on Liliana, you're hitting them with a 2/2 Pixie just over and over again. It can feel like you can't be stopped, which I think, as you've mentioned before, that's what tempo aims to do. When you are on pace as the tempo player, you feel completely unstoppable because you know you're in a position where you have an answer to anything they throw at you.
It is very swingy. It is the most swingy, really, deck archetype. When you win, you feel like you could never have lost that game. But when you lose, you feel like you never had a shot. Tempo, historically, is really, really bad at playing from behind because all of its pieces are designed to work best in a proactive game plan. In terms of pure tempo decks, the most iconic tempo card of all time is Delver of Secrets. For those of you who don't know, it's a 1-mana 1/1, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you can reveal the top card of your library, and if it is an instant or sorcery, it turns into a 3/2 with flying. So in the decks that are playing it, it is essentially a 1-mana 3/2 flyer, which is very, very good. And the rest of the deck is pretty much permission and reach. It is ways to stop your opponent killing your Delver of Secrets and lightning bolts to kill your opponent after you've hit them with Delver of Secrets 4 times.
When we say reach here, we are not meaning the keyword ability reach.
Certainly
either.
not. Sorry, burn is probably a better way to put it.
Just for clarification, reach here meaning getting you closer to victory. The ability to punch past that additional, when you've hit your opponent for however much damage with your Delver of Secrets, being able to put them within reach of a lightning bolt.
When your opponent has a 2/4 reach creature, then you cast your lightning bolt and they die.
Yeah.
Tempo aggro decks are relatively common, but the delineation is often in the cards that are being played. So the go-to in my mind for a tempo aggro deck is the much beloved or much loathed Esper Pixie. It has a lot of strong aggressive elements. It's got a lot of difficult to deal with threats. It leverages time through bounce spells and recursive burn spells, and it is really hard to deal with when it is ahead. But you'll also know if you've ever played with or against the deck, it is miserable to play when behind.
It can feel, again, in that tempo pace, unstoppable.
In terms of tempo mid-range strategies, I have Orzhov Pixie. So I rescind my previous comment.
I was just about to say, I'm looking at the notes here.
Turns out I don't remember what I wrote in this episode.
And 10 seconds ago, you said Orzhov Pixie wasn't tempo.
Yes.
We're just human. We are still human.
Turns out I'm overconfident. Orzhov Pixie is a tempo deck, but it does not have a traditional tempo game plan necessarily. What it is doing is the win the game condition for Orzhov Pixie as opposed to Esper Pixie isn't your life total hitting 0, it is your threats hitting 0. And it does this proactively with discard spells like Hopeless Nightmare, cheap removal spells, large sweepers like Temporary Lockdown, Momentum Breakers, and Liliana of the Veil. And then it will kill you with a Lauren. It's kind of a difficult line to draw, But this tempo mid-range strategy will often have these sort of alternate win the game conditions where it is using its early leverage to push you down, and then it will beat you on card quality. These decks don't often exist because having high quality, like high mid-range quality card for card quality cards on top of cards that are assertive in a mid-range context or assertive in a tempo context doesn't often happen. But as creatures in particular get better and better as Magic's design continues, I think we are likely to see more of it. And finally, we get to talk about tempo control. This deck doesn't, strictly speaking, exist because the assertive nature of tempo is at odds with the reactive nature of control. But an argument can be made for assertive, sorcery speed, stacks style tempo decks. So they're more common in Eternal formats because Wizards rather smartly tends not to print stacks pieces anymore because nobody likes playing against them. But a deck to look at for decks of this ilk would be a deck like Layer 5 in Legacy, which leverages cards like Humility to proactively shut down your opponent's game plan and then kill you in the late game with a threat that gets around what you're trying to do, like a Gideon Planeswalker. Tempo control is actually, in my mind, more at odds than aggro control because the cards that exist in a tempo setting and the cards that exist in a control setting are often very at odds. Whereas, sometimes you get counterspells that burn your opponent. Sometimes you have cheap creatures that you can use to interact with your opponent's board, like Blood Tithe Harvester. It's a tricky line to draw, and we will talk about control tempo decks in our lovely next episode. But just understand that there is a very real balance to be done between those two things, and it can often be quite tricky.
These are your quintessential forward decks, is what I would say. Altogether, you have aggro, combo, tempo. These are going to be your foot forward decks. You want to be ahead at all costs, or at least most of the time. These are decks that do best on the front foot, not on the back foot. And these are decks that thrive in on the play. And being on the play.
You really want to win the die roll for these ones, folks.
That's all we have for you for part 1 of our deck archetypes discussion. We look forward to seeing you again next week. New episodes release on Mondays at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Until then, you can keep track of all of our releases at Raise MTG on both Instagram and Blue Sky. You can find me on the same platforms at Kira Bobira and Maya at Maya MTG. A big thank you to the State Library of Victoria for the ongoing use of their space. And until next week, remember, I know just the person for that job.